Hi, everyone. This is Sharon. Welcome to my live chat. Today, we are talking about plant-based eating in the Gen Z generation. And I'm really excited to have my guest, Jasmine Westerdahl, with us today. Hi, Jasmine.
Hi, it's so nice to be here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Jasmine is a nutrition student at Loma University, where I attended school and studied nutrition. And she's very passionate about plant-based eating. So I'm really excited to have you here with us, Jasmine. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your own personal journey to becoming a vegan?
Yeah, so actually, I was raised my whole entire life as a vegan or on a 100% plant-based diet. And my parents both actually became vegan before they were even married. So it's because my dad's a registered dietitian himself. And so he just saw the vegan or plant-based diet as the optimal diet for health and wellness. So I really grew up on a 100% plant-based diet because of the health benefits that it has.
Right. And Jasmine's father, John Westerdahl, is a very well-known leader in the plant-based world. Can you tell us a little bit about him? He has an amazing radio program, right?
Yeah, so he has a radio program called Health and Longevity Radio, and it's on the Life Talk Radio Network, where he talks about plant-based eating. He talks to leading professionals in the field, doctors, dietitians, things like that. And
Yeah, that's great. I love John. He's a friend and colleague of mine as well. So he must have been an inspiration for you because you were surrounded by this kind of passion for plant-based eating, right?
definitely. Actually, when I was younger, I was so adamant that I would not do what my dad does. It's a stubborn teenager in me, but it definitely changed, and he's very happy.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what is it like going to school at Loma Linda? You know, when I went to school there, it wasn't even known as one of the blue zones. Now we know that Loma Linda is a blue zone, one of the places where people live the longest around the world. And it's kind
Mhm.
of famous for its plant-based philosophy. But what is it like for you, today with all the new trends when it comes to plant-based eating?
Oh, well, it's so awesome being here in Loma Linda because it's a Seventh-day Adventist school, so they promote a vegetarian diet. So everything we learn is revolves around plant-based eating. Obviously, we still have to learn, like as a dietetic student, we still need to learn about like meat and dairy, but we really focus on that plant-based aspect. And even the cafeteria here is 100% vegetarian, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Loma Linda, and it's so nice being in a room with like-minded people. There's 4 vegans in my class, which is awesome. That's never happened to me before.
4 out of how many? How many students?
4 out of 17.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've been a registered dietitian for, over 30 years, and I think that there are more and more plant-based dietitians entering this space. I don't have the data to know that for sure, but it's a feeling I get. So you're seeing that a little bit as well in your school program. Yeah. So, talking a little bit about some of the challenges, what it's like, if you're interested in following a vegan diet or plant-based diet and you're perhaps in high school or those college years, what do you think some of those challenges are since you are studying this field, plus you've experienced it yourself?
Yeah. So I think was a question like challenges for someone that's going into a plant-based diet, something that they may experience?
Yeah. For example, since you're kind of a leader in this
Mhm.
field now, what are the things that people ask you that you know, they find as barriers or difficulties? They're interested in plant-based eating, but some of the challenges that they might have in order to do it well.
Well, I think one is just like, are you getting all the nutrients and like sufficient energy from being on a plant-based diet? I know protein is a big question that everyone seems to think that it's really hard to get protein on a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
But I'm not familiar I don't know if you've seen Game Changers.
Yes.
It was a great documentary focusing like completely on plant-based diet, protein, athletes, and I think it's such like a good film for people to watch who really have that question.
Mm-hmm.
Other issues or challenges I think that people may find about regarding like plant-based is I think this is a problem that people experience when they're becoming more plant-based or they're wanting to transition is for like younger kids is the school meals issue. I interned at a school district in the nutritional services, and I found that if you are on a plant-based diet, especially for people that are just like trying to transition, it's extremely hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a very supportive environment for that change.
That's a really good point. And, I did some work in Los Angeles where I lived in Los Angeles County until recently. And, I actually testified
Mhm.
in front of the school board in Los Angeles to you know, uh, support this idea that schools should provide a plant-based option. And we had that passed, which was, all in the news and everything. So, California is kind of a little ahead of the curve on some of those things. And the reason why we were trying to get that there is exactly what you were saying. Is it's
Mhm.
really difficult for families that want to eat a plant-based option in the school system. So that's a really good point. So if you were in high school and you're in in the school system, are there any suggestions that you would have for how they
It,
could get some plant-based options?
it's so hard because the way that the government works, because they regulate the school system, they'll make accommodations if you have a doctor's note. So
Yeah.
if you somehow get a doctor's note saying that you cannot eat this, and this, that's really the only way that the nutritional services is obligated to make those accommodations. But if not, then they can't guarantee. And it's up to you to really bring your own lunch, which could be difficult for some people's family situations, you know?
Right, right. So those are good comments. Um, what kind of advice do you give? You talked a little bit about protein, and I
Mhm.
think I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm also glad you talked about game changers because I actually wrote a blog about that, and I was on a podcast. You can find the notes in my blog.
Okay.
Make sure you go to the full blog at sharonpalmer.com, and you'll find the notes for our chat today and some tips that Jasmine and I will be sharing with you. But I'm glad you brought up protein because I think that's a stumbling block for a lot of people. They just feel like they're not going to get enough protein. So what are some of the protein sources you recommend to, people, young people, if they're really trying to make that switch, and really it is changing the protein. A lot of times it's about taking the plate and swapping out the animal protein for a plant protein.
Mhm. Well, there's so many different options, whether you want to opt for like the meat alternatives or the textured vegetable protein, things like that. But also like tofu, I love tofu. Legumes, like lentils and beans are most of my staples for protein. And then for athletes who take a protein powder, there's obviously so many different options for plant-based proteins that way too. And I think people are really concerned that you're not getting enough protein, and then they think about like the protein sources that have all the essential amino acids and those that don't, and so that's kind of a thing. But like our body has something called an amino acid pool, and so your body breaks down like your foods throughout the day, and then the protein goes into that pool. And then throughout the day, you're just building up that protein again. So your body is getting all the protein that it needs if you're eating a really varied, nutritionally adequate diet.
That's absolutely right. Thank you for bringing that up. I always explain to people that we now know you don't have to combine all these things on your plate at one time. It's
Mm.
what's happening over the course of a day, and you can get those nutrients, those types of amino acids in your diet through all those things. And I know that I love tofu as well, and legumes. They're in my diet every single day as
Yeah.
protein sources. So thank you for those suggestions. One thing I wanted to ask you is, you talked a little bit about having more students in your class that are plant
Mm.
based, but overall, are you seeing in Gen Z or whether it's high school, college kids, are you seeing an increased interest just overall in plant based eating?
Definitely. I even among my personal friend group from high school and middle school, some of them are adopting a more plant-based diet. They may not go completely vegan, but they're starting to cut out certain foods. And I think that's really attributed to not only the health, which is obviously everyone's personal concern, but we're learning so much about the implications on the environment that a high diet, a diet high in meat and animal products has on the environment, as well as the moral implications that it has. So I think people are becoming more aware of those issues and really starting to be like, wow, I really need to address these things, and I can address it through changing my diet.
That's really true. You hit on all the big ones,
Yeah.
and I think that young people are so passionate about all these things you talked
Mhm.
about, not only health, but the environment. We're so, engaged in that conversation now and what we can do with our diets and then the moral issues. And I believe
Mhm.
that when young people come home and they can influence their whole family. And I've seen that. I don't know if you've seen that, where one person can come home from college and say, I'm doing this, and then pretty soon the whole family is energized. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, I've seen it a little. I don't really know, like everyone, like what their parents are thinking, but I know one of my friends in the program's vegan, but her parents aren't. But for her birthday, for his birthday, her father's birthday, he wanted to go to a vegan restaurant. And
Oh,
he was so excited and he loved the food. So it's
that's
awesome to
great.
see people experience vegan food and realize, wow, it's actually really good. And it's not this flavorless thing that I thought it was.
I know. I feel like there's a trend right now where people go out to eat at vegan restaurants for the experience, and they're not even vegan. And chefs have been telling me this. I have a lot of my favorite vegan restaurants in California. I love to go to Sage. I don't know if you've been to Sage
I
before.
have. It's really
Yes. And then Plant Food and Wine is another one, and Venice
good.
Beach is one of my favorites.
Um,
There's a lot of great plant-based restaurants in Southern California, and I've talked to the chefs before, and they say that most of their clients are not vegan, but it
wow.
just shows that the food is so beautiful. And I'll never forget that one uh, a vegan chef told me that when you're a chef, the things that give a plate beauty are the plant foods. I mean, what else gives you color? There's nothing else on a plate. The animal proteins are very kind of a dull color, but when you're looking for color and texture, it's the fruits and vegetables and the grains and all of that. So it is interesting to see that people don't think it's going to taste bad now. They're actually intrigued by the taste of.
Hmm.
So that's really cool. So you talked about some of the reasons why you think more young people are interested in plant-based eating. So are there any other, like, what are your favorite tips for people? For example, people that are starting to, be interested in this style of eating. Maybe they want to dip their toe in there. What are your tips for people who really are interested in getting involved and just don't know where to start?
Well, the first thing I say is like, no one's perfect and don't strive for perfection because obviously there's no such thing as perfect. So sometimes it going full in works for people, but sometimes it doesn't. So I think it just like, I would say really work with how you feel and maybe just start with one day a week. Like the meatless Monday concept, I think there's actually like true benefits to that aspect of transitioning to a plant-based diet. Start with one day and then 2 days. And I think also like embrace the creativity that's required to be on a plant-based diet. You can't eat your typical meals that you've been cooking for the past however many years. And that's the beauty of one, going on a plant-based diet, or two, just trying something new, is you have to really think outside the box. You can have more fun in the kitchen, and it's just a whole experience that would truly benefit yourself in any way.
That's great. I recommend Meatless Monday too. That's one of my favorite tips, is just start out with one day a week going plant-based and see if you like it, and then add another day, and there are benefits from doing that. So those
Definitely.
are really great tips. So are there any concerns that you have for young people when they do go 100% plant-based or vegan? Have you seen some nutrition mistakes that they make sometimes
um,
that you'd like to help them correct?
well, first off, the adoption of like a lot of processed food. I understand that the meat alternatives, it really is, I think, a good stepping stone from going into a plant-based diet. But I think we also need to be mindful of eating the whole foods, like 100% plant foods, from the ground, and making sure that they're eating a diet that's so varied, because the way you get your nutrients is by eating different like fruits and vegetables and legumes and grains. So you can't just eat like one type of food, like rice and beans every day. You need to incorporate more foods and make sure you're getting a variety of
Yeah,
different.
those are really good tips. Yeah. I like that you pointed out the processed, because I think, I have observed this with, the Gen Z college students. They're really focused on is eating a vegan diet, and they're not even thinking about health or nutrition. They're just thinking,
Yeah.
I'm going to eat vegan and it's all going to work out. And I see major things, like they could be leaving out protein, for example. They could eat a meal with no good source of protein, or they're just eating really highly refined junk foods, which is what you're talking about. And then you're not getting all the health benefits, because we know there are so many health benefits linked with plant-based diets now. But those are diets based on eating real whole plant foods. So, that's something that we can get back to. And I do think there's a little bit of a health halo for vegan foods, so that people just think naturally if it's vegan, it's going to be healthy, right?
Yeah, that's not true at all. Like, I think there's definitely a benefit, like for the new plant-based options that are coming out in regards to like veggie burgers and things like that. They're definitely beneficial for the environment and for the animals, but they're still high in saturated fat.
Exactly. Exactly. You're so much better off eating some lentils and, some farro, and with a couple different veggies, But at the same time, I tell people my philosophy is that if you want to have these meat alternatives is one or two times a week, that's great. And I like to have things like that for nights when I'm really busy, or if I'm going to a barbecue, I want to have my little veggie burger. But it's the beauty of a plant-based diet is eating all these gorgeous plant foods of the whole rainbow of vegetables and grains. And
Exactly. Yeah, I as well. I will, I still eat my veggie burgers and things like that. But it's not an everyday occurrence. And like I said before, there's no such thing as perfection. So
yes, yes,
yeah.
good points. So, do you also see any common misperceptions among, young people when it comes to maybe nutrition or just plant-based eating? What are those?
Well, like I mentioned before, the protein,
Yeah.
or just not getting adequate certain nutrients. Also, the fact that vegan is expensive. It's
Yeah.
not always expensive. Vegan can be expensive, just like a steakhouse can be expensive. It's your choice, your personal choices. So you can opt to go out and eat at a nice vegan restaurant, but you can also eat the food staples. Eating whole food, plant-based foods are natural, and so they're going to be cheaper in the long run. Also, a lot of the bulk foods, like your beans and legumes and grains, things like that, bulk foods are always generally cheaper per unit. So I think the idea that vegan is expensive isn't really.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I bring that up a lot too. And I think the concept that vegan is expensive has gotten even worse, because some of these meat alternatives are very expensive. So I have actually had people tell me that they can't afford to eat plant-based because those plant-based meat alternatives are so expensive. So, and I explained to them, just like what you were talking about, well, beans are the least expensive protein source on the planet. So it is possible to eat a plant-based diet, and eating in seasons. You don't have to eat berries when they're out of season, fresh berries. You can switch to frozen berries, and
eating in season is beneficial for cost and also for the environment too, because there's less travel. It's going between the farm and the consumer. Also, some people are doing like a cost per nutrient analysis, where they're finding that plant foods have a lower cost per nutrient than meat or dairy. And when we think about our health as our wealth, that's also something to consider.
those are all really good points. I mean, I believe that, and we actually have studies that show a plant-based diet planned well could be less expensive than the Western diet. We actually have studies of that. But even beyond that, I believe that we should invest in our food. You know, we have one of the least expensive food systems in terms of the amount of cost that we're spending on food per person in the world. We have a very inexpensive food supply. So we're used to inexpensive food, but we should actually value our food a little bit more. It should be a little bit more of a priority when we divvy up our budgets. And I know that's easy to say, and we have an issue with food security in our country, which I totally understand. And I'm very empathetic about that. And, you know, I'm always trying to help, you know, find ways to make plant-based eating more affordable. So these are all really good topics, but it can fit into a budget-friendly diet for sure.
Oh, definitely. And when people say like, I can't afford to be healthy, well, you can't afford to not be healthy, you know, like you need, like you said, you need to invest in yourself and your health.
Exactly. I mean, the repercussions of poor diets, you know, we see type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Those are very expensive, you know, conditions, not only from a healthcare perspective, but lost time at work, all these things. And then your life, you know, the quality of your life diminishes too. So the power of eating a more plant-based diet is so important for everybody. And even, you know, my philosophy, it sounds like it's a lot like yours, is even if you don't want to be vegan, just get on that path to eating mostly plants, you know, and you will reap health benefits.
Yeah, definitely. Also, another misconception is like a plant-based diet is restrictive, you know, you're restricting yourself from certain foods, but in reality, you're restricting yourself from foods that are harmful to your health. So I think that's also another misconception that can be debunked.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that things are really changing in a positive way if you want to eat a plant-based diet, because there's so much availability now too. I mean, just in the last few years, I mean, just look at the plant-based dairy alternative aisle. Now there are so many yogurts and cheeses and milks and so many products that you really have a big spectrum of food to choose from.
There's so
And
much access to plant-based foods than there was when I was a little girl. So
oh,
it's really,
exactly.
yeah, it's
And
really
even
great to
when you
see.
travel now, even fast food restaurants, as we talked about a little bit about the alternatives now, the meat alternatives, there are more
Mhm.
fast food restaurants that have options. If you're traveling and you know, it's hard for you, you don't have to pack everything, you know, because you can find these things.
Yeah.
So it's really changed it and made it a lot easier for people, I think.
Definitely.
So I wanted to ask you, you know, what are you passionate about as a, you know, a soon-to-be dietitian, and you know, being involved in the nutrition world? What do you see yourself doing? What are the things that you just can't wait to get started on as in the field
Well,
of nutrition?
I'm really passionate about like community nutrition education, things like that, going out to the community. I want to do a lot of like community-based work, like lecturing and food demonstrations. I'm also really interested in like communication and journalism. So writing articles, maybe having a blog, things like that. And I know you mentioned the food insecurity issue that we have today, and that's actually something I'm really passionate about, and I want to pursue when I get my degree, my RD. I want to work with people in the community here, and then people internationally who don't have access to the like nutritionally adequate and plant-based foods, and just teach them how they can get access, and hopefully improve their health. So that's one thing I'm really passionate about.
That's great. So do you have any favorite resources that you'd like to share when it comes to plant-based living? I mean, we could share them in our blog, and I want to remind everybody again that you can see the full blog at sharonpalmer.com, and we'll list all the resources we were talking about today so that you can find those. But for example, if people want to start eating more plant-based diet, where are your favorite places to send them?
Well, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is a professional organization of nutrition professionals, has a practice group called the Vegetarian Nutrition Practice Group, or the NDPG.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a great website where you can go and get recipes, or you can read articles about how to transition and like what a plant-based lifestyle and diet entail. And so I think they're a great resource for anyone, whether it's a dietitian or a consumer.
Mm-hmm. I like
Yeah,
that resource too. I send people there all the time. And are you on social media?
I am. I just have my personal Instagram. I don't have like a nutrition one yet,
Okay.
but
Well,
yeah.
we can share all your information too.
Okay.
Well, thank
Um,
you so much, Jasmine. I just loved having you with me today. And I think this is a really important topic because, I constantly I'm asked by college students and high school students about, my tips for plant-based eating. And I think there's a real hunger for this information and it's very powerful. So you are a true inspiration. So I know you're going to do wonderful things. So
Thank you
thank you
so
for joining us. Again, you're going to find all of our show notes on the full blog at SharonPalmer.com. So check it out. And thank you for joining us today. This has been Sharon Palmer reminding you to eat and live the goodness.